Amanda Litman, thanks so much for joining us. You're one of the fresh, interesting new voices in politics that, for somebody who's been covering this stuff for 40 years, I'm always glad to find. So, welcome.
Thank
Um,
you for having me, John.
Let me start by asking a question that's obviously not core to you, but it's dominating the political news at this moment. So I just have to ask you, um, this Epstein story, does that tell you anything relevant to your work? And do you welcome the focus on that as opposed to the most popular issue of the day, which is affordability?
I don't know if I welcome it or not. I don't know if politically, like, it's bad for Trump. I do think it is worth holding people accountable for what seems like an egregious, illegal sex trafficking ring of young women and girls. So whether or not it's good politics, I think it is good justice, and it is good to make sure that this is something that we do not let slide.
Is
Um,
there any, in your mind, generational aspect to this, or is it just bad person doing bad things of whatever age?
Bad person doing bad things with a hint of, wow, these people are bad at sending emails.
Mhm. Well, that's generational.
Mhm.
Okay, let's go back to last week. You had quite a successful Democratic election in 2025. What lessons do you draw from that?
So Run for Something had about 222 candidates on the ballot across the country. We're still tracking outcomes for about 21 races where they're too close to call. Local elections take a little time. But it looks like we had at least 129 outright wins, including 36 red to blue flips, along with 9 candidates moving to runoffs. We're tracking for about a 66% win rate on election day and pretty close to that for the year overall. We had folks in elections earlier this year. That's amazing. I often don't like to have that big of a win rate. I think it's good to take big swings. I think if your win rate gets too high, like you're not taking enough chances. But we were fighting in some hard races. We won elections. Yes, we helped elect a Democratic Socialist in Atlanta. We helped elect far left candidates across the country. But we also helped elect a former Republican who left the party after January 6th and decided to run for county office in Clarion, Pennsylvania, or municipal office in Clarion, Pennsylvania, Andrew Harbaugh, a journalist, a dad of two, one of whom had special needs, for whom the cuts to Medicaid and the cuts to the Department of Education directly affected his family, his kids. We worked with a guy, Taylor Ramett, a union leader and a veteran in Texas, in a district that Trump won by 17 points. This was a open race for a special election. That was a three-way primary or a three-way jungle race. Um, and Taylor came in first of the three-way race with 48% of the vote against two billionaire-backed Republicans. He's now pushed it into a runoff where his opponent is a executive at Patriot Mobile, the cell phone company slash
Mhm.
political organization that spends money electing extremists. Um, those are hard races. We elected folks in districts that Trump won 70-30. So I am delighted to see this. I'm also delighted to prove out that we are building what Democrats need to be doing everywhere, which is a tent, a party, and a movement big enough to do it all, to win in hard Trump places and in urban environments and more blue areas.
Well, the two biggest races were for governor in New Jersey and Virginia, in addition to the New York City mayor's race. Obviously, Mamdani is a one of a kind of candidate, and that's a unique political environment. The victories of Mikey Sherrill and Abigail Spanberger were coded as moderate victories. Did you see it that way?
I think moderate is a state of mind as much as it is a policy position. And I think what they all talked about were affordability. They talked about cost of living. And I think actually the thing that unites them that makes it really hard to translate into 2026 is they were all running for state or local executive offices. They were running for offices where you can actually do things. And I think this is one of the challenges we'll have in the midterms in 2026, at least on the congressional level, is that if you're running for Congress in 2026, there's not a lot you can actually promise to deliver. You can't promise legislation. You can't promise policies. You can paint a vision for what you might want 4 or 5 years down the road, but in the short term, there's not much you can immediately do. Now, they can promise accountability and oversight over Trump. Unfortunately, Senate Democrats just sort of undercut that argument entirely. But hopefully that will be enough and that the vision they can paint enough. But it is why I think one of the lessons we need to take away going into next year is that we got to give the megaphone and make sure that the people that candidates are hearing the most from are those state and local leaders who will actually be able to talk about their quality of life and their cost of living.
Liking this video? Then don't just watch, hit like, share, and subscribe. And tap the bell so you never miss a video or live show. But if you want early access to exclusive content, then you have to head to zeteo.com and subscribe now. You'll be supporting fearless, independent journalism.
Well, I want to get to the shutdown in a second, but let me just ask you one more thing about Spanberger and Cheryl. You are promoting young progressives to run for office. The younger generation of the Democratic Party is disproportionately female. Is that
Mhm.
an independent value that you want to elevate, or are you trying to figure out how to get more men to fit those categories and run successfully?
Run for Something works with both men and women and folks who identify as non-binary or something else entirely. We work with folks of all different kinds of races and backgrounds. It's important to us to focus on leaders who are underrepresented in government. So, about half our candidates are women, about half of them are people of color, but that also means about half of them are men. So, I think it's more important than race or class or gender is that this person really reflects the values of their community, that they are of the community. That doesn't mean born and raised there, but that means that they understand what their voters care about, what their neighbors care about, and that they know how to communicate to them. I love that our candidates range from, 18-year-olds running for school board to 40-year-olds running for state ledge and city council and library board. And I love that they really are tight on values, but flexible on policy. Because we know that a pro choice candidate for school board is going to talk about that very differently than a pro choice candidate for state legislature. And one in New York is going to talk about it very differently than someone in Alaska. And that's okay, as long as we all agree we're working towards the same general goals.
Um, okay, so let's talk about the shutdown. The advocates for calling a close to the shutdown said, A, we're stopping the pain for federal workers and travelers, a whole bunch of people affected by the slowdown of government. We successfully highlighted the split on healthcare between Republicans and Democrats, and we weren't going to be able in the end to get much more than that. How do you assess that argument, and what was your reaction to the end of the shutdown?
Mad. It feels like a betrayal. And I actually feel like part of this is a communications problem in that if you didn't think you were ever going to get something on healthcare, what were we doing here? Because right now, healthcare bills are going
Well,
to
what about messaging and elevating the significance of the issue, and also stepping in to make a larger point about the authoritarian regime that the country is dealing with?
Yeah, it's good, but is it going to be good a year from now? I think it matters to a certain extent. And to give up in this way and then to do, and I think actually the more dangerous part was to then do a press tour and was like, well, we learned the fighting Trump wasn't worth it. That is not helpful. That is aggressive. Had you said specifically, like, we tried our hardest, your healthcare bills are going to go up and we're going to keep fighting, maybe we could have had a different conversation. But I think much like with the shutdown fight back in March where Schumer folded, part of this is you did not manage people's expectations accordingly. You did not give people a realistic view of what you thought you could accomplish and then take them with you as you were doing the negotiations. This is a messaging failure as much as it is a practical failure. And the fact of the matter is, the healthcare bills are going to double or triple for folks in January, and that is going to really hurt them. And yeah, maybe that's good politics, but that is shitty for people. That's
Well, do you think that then the pain of the shutdown for federal workers and others inconvenienced and or significantly harmed SNAP beneficiaries, for example, that would have been worth it to keep going?
I mean, it depends what they think they could have gotten at the end. And part of this, I think, is we don't know what we could have gotten. I think one of the more revealing things was that Tim Kaine said in his op ed in the New York Times, we did this in part because they were going to kill the filibuster. Filibuster's bad. Filibuster's bad.
Right.
Now, there's a lot of this that assumes, I think, like a fair Republican Party that is a good faith actor. And this is part of the problem with Senate Democrats is they seem to still believe these can be good negotiators. It is telling that modern Democrats, people who've come up in the last 8 or 10 years, understand that is not the case. The Republican Party of today cannot be trusted. And I cannot believe that they did what is essentially a pinky promise.
Is that a generational failure related to the fact that Chuck Schumer is 74 years old and's been there a long time?
I do. I think that's partially generational, and it's not purely on age. Part of it is how long have you been on politics? How long have you been engaging in this? Is the Republican Party the one of when you entered politics or the one of today?
Well, that's one of the things that is interesting to me. Young progressives. I'm curious as to which do you think is the more important part of that formulation, the young part or the progressive part? With one specific example, Bernie Sanders is 7 years older than Chuck Schumer. Do you put them in the same category as people who need to step aside for younger replacements?
Absolutely. Not for the same reasons, but I think absolutely Bernie Sanders should be making this his last term. And I think you're seeing him do that in real time. He is doing what is essentially succession planning by anointing other leaders, by lifting them up. I think part of the problem is that a lot of these older leaders have not done that. They have not created succession plans. They have not tried to lift the bench with them as they have risen and created new space for folks. In order to get a new generation of leaders, the old ones have to step back and make room. There's only so much room at the top. I know sometimes people get mad at me when I say that, but yeah, Bernie Sanders should also make this his last term, as should so many of the other older folks in Congress. That's not to say they haven't done good. Everyone is entitled to age and live with dignity and respect. No one is entitled to age as one of the most powerful people in the country.
Let me talk a little bit about the debate over how Democrats can be more competitive, in particular in the United States Senate, where there's so many states that seem to be out of reach. Um, there's an argument about style and messaging and youth. On the one hand, there's also an argument that Democrats fundamentally need to repair the image of their party by shifting on important symbolic or substantive issues. I'll give you an example. You've been enthusiastic, and many people are, about James Tallarico in tech. Josh Barrow, the journalist, wrote a piece recently saying, no, that's James Tallarico puts a more attractive face on a losing proposition for Democrats, specifically his comments about transgender Americans, and that Democrats need to strike a different tone about that. And it's not just about having a young, spiritual, outstanding communicator. What do you make of that argument?
I think this is for Texas voters to decide. I find a lot of this conversation about what Democrats need to do, like name the Democrats in which you were talking about this, because there is no one. I think about this a lot with in the New York race, where I'm a New York City resident. I was a New York City voter. It's like, why the fuck should New York City voters make decisions about who's going to be my mayor or my leader based on what could possibly affect the Wisconsin Senate race 2 years from now? That is an insane thing to do. And it's also not a thing that you can actually reasonably ask voters to do. If James Tallarico is able to win the Democratic primary in Texas and then able to make the general competitive, as all polling indicates he can, then great. That's the kind of candidate who can win. If you don't like the way that he is phrasing his beliefs, which he so clearly holds so deeply, run a different candidate and prove your point. I find this argument with Democrats should do this, Democrats should do that. Cool. Run the candidate and prove it. Because really what we know is that we need candidates who genuinely believe what they're saying and could communicate it. And
Well,
and just to complete the point here, the idea that we should change our language or it's just a simple different words could break through is so deeply misunderstanding the way people consume information, and is also misunderstanding the premise of what makes candidates compelling, which is authenticity, which is the fact that they genuinely believe what they believe. If James Tallarico genuinely believes what he's saying about trans people, which he does and he says he does, great, he should say that. Full stop.
Well, does that mean you do not think there is a broad image repair that needs to take place for the Democratic Party, that it's idiosyncratic state to state? And sounds like you're more in line with, say, somebody like Adam Gentleson with the Searchlight Institute, who says, no, we need less orthodoxy and more individualization, where people can identify themselves as authentic in ways that connect to those states, and what's going to work in state A may not work in state B.
That has always been run for something's model. We have always, in the last 9 years, operated in a way that candidates need to reflect the communities they're in. And I think what's doing more harm to the Democratic Party brand than any single progressive candidate is people like Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer refusing to support the Democratic nominee for mayor in New York City up until they were, in Jeffries' case, literally dragged through it. Or people like the moderate Democrats in the United States Senate saying and going on TV and saying, you know what, fighting Trump just isn't worth it. That does damage the Democratic Party brand. It is not some exciting, enthusiastic candidate who can compellingly connect with voters.
Well, do you then reject the idea that the socialist tag that Mamdani embraced would be a weight around the neck of other Democrats elsewhere? Just you think it's
Well,
not.
they call Joe Biden a communist. They call Nancy Pelosi a communist and a socialist. They are always going to find some Democrat to call a communist or a socialist. And you know what? Young people, not that afraid of socialism because capitalism hasn't really been working for them. So, yeah, is it ideal? I don't know. It doesn't seem to matter because it's what he genuinely believes. It's what he genuinely believes. And I don't want people to run away from their convictions for political expediency because, boy, do voters hate that shit.
Are there any issues on which you think the Democratic Party has positioned itself too far to the left and ought to move to the center, or is that left-right continuum just not relevant in your view?
I think it's not relevant in our view because the center is also defined by what the left and right position themselves as. The right has now positioned themselves as the party of the neo-Nazis. So, a little bit less center, a little bit less right than that is still can be problematic. I feel like people get lost in this idea of ideology when voters do not have cohesive ideology. Well, politicians don't either. But voters, especially who are not actively engaged in politics, who do not live and breathe this and do this for a living, don't have coherent ideologies. They have problems in their life that they want their government to fix. And we need candidates and electeds who can communicate about those problems and present solutions. Whether it's left, right, or center is actually less important than whether it is relevant to them or not.
Let me ask one question where at least some people have made the argument that progressivism and youth and freshness and authenticity are in conflict, and that's the Maine race with Graham
Mhm.
Platt. A lot of people in Maine, I think, younger Democrats, very excited about Graham Plattner. Washington Monthly wrote a piece saying, if you look at what Janet Mills has done, she's a very progressive and successful leader. Yes, she's 77 years old, but she's vindicated uh, progressive values in various ways. And you look at Graham Plattner and the things that have come out in his past and the tattoo and all that stuff, uh, that should be a no-brainer for progressives. Tell me your response to that.
I think the bigger problem is that we don't have a bench of talent in Maine who can run for Senate besides Janet Mills. Like, what a damning indictment of our work in a state like Maine that our only option, seemingly to like within the political system, to run for Senate in a race we desperately need is a 78-year-old former governor who had to be dragged into this because she wanted to retire. She wanted to go off and spend the rest of her days like with her family and enjoying the beautiful state of Maine. I think that is a real structural problem here. It is going to be on Maine Democratic voters to decide how they feel in this primary and then who can be most competitive, who they want as their senator. And if they decide that Graham Plattner is the call, great. We will support the Democratic nominee in that race. I think it is so uh, silly even to try and pinpoint a singular personal issue here when the problem is structural.
We're starting to get a lot of questions coming in. So let me just throw some of them at you. Um, Nick Perro writes, were the winning candidates moderate or common sense progressive values?
All of
Advocate
the above.
progressive values.
All of the above. The candidates were focused on their community. The candidates were speaking to the problems their voters care about. Like, is building more housing moderate or progressive? Is like universal or if at least affordable childcare moderate or progressive? Is making sure that hospitals aren't closing moderate or progressive? I think that this is an ideological spectrum that is not where voters exist.
Um, I got a question from Anna Grimes in Nashville, who, full disclosure, happens to be my cousin. She,
Hi.
Democrats keep bringing knives to gunfights, perhaps not surprising given the gerontocracy. Do you think age is related to willingness to fight?
Generally speaking, yeah, I think generational vibes is a shortcut to account for willingness to fight. Part of it is how you understand the Republican Party of today. I also think part of it is your ability to communicate in this moment. Um, like I don't think it's charming that Chuck Schumer has a flip phone. I think it's actually a damning indictment of his ability to communicate in this era. Um, you need to understand how people consume information. One of my favorite questions to ask elected officials of really any age is like, tell me about your social media feed. Tell me what side of TikTok you're on. Tell me about the social media spaces you hang out in. The ones who there is not a right or wrong answer, but there is a I don't understand the question or not answer. And if you don't understand the question, if you are not at least a little bit of a consumer, you cannot be a producer in this moment, and it will not come across as true. And I think that is one of the challenges our older leaders face.
Where are you, by the way, on the argument that social media has become terminally toxic and that everybody should get off of it?
Oh, totally. I would love to. We should delete the internet and throw it all into the ocean. But until we can do that as a society, I'm going to use it to get the information out.
Stephanie Wilson writes, they should have made the shutdown about the Epstein Files all along. You agree with that?
It would have been hard. I don't know. I don't know if that would have worked compellingly because I think that's not really about people. That's about Trump. But at the very least, they probably could have delivered something. So it's an interesting argument. I don't know if I totally buy it, but I'm open to hearing it. It's an honest answer for you.
Sam W. from Indiana writes, our local party was smothered to death by a coastal-brained national party that still doesn't understand the Rust Belt wants economically left labor messaging. So sick of the national party sabotaging us. Do you think left labor messaging is a broadly appealing, particularly in the Midwest, message?
We'll find out in the 2026 election. I will say the idea that the national party can do anything competently is really giving them a lot of credit. If you don't like the way that your local party is running, you should join it. And that's not a nice answer, but it's a real one because the local party is only as powerful as the members in it. And if you want to change the way your candidates are communicating, you should run for office yourself or get involved with the candidates who are running because that is the true determinative factor of how people understand the party in your area. If you give them a Democrat to meet who can talk about the issues they care about in a way that they understand, in a language that they use, you can supersede the national brand because then it becomes, well, I know the Democratic Party isn't what I see on Fox News because I've met John. John's running for office. John came to my, we had iced tea and we talked about property taxes. That can supersede some of the national propaganda.
I assume that you spend a significant portion of time raising money for RFS and also helping RFS candidates raise money. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. So Lauren Sargent writes the following. If candidates won't eschew corporate money and APAC money, I won't support them, full stop. Where are you on money in politics and the argument that part of success for Democrats is stepping away from big sources of money in politics?
I think we need big structural reform. I think things like campaign finance reform, we've seen this in New York and Seattle, where the ways in which campaigns are funded directly affect who is able to run. I am not always as sold on the who gives them the money shapes the political outcomes argument. I think that assumes maybe the wrong order of chicken and egg. They get the money because of who they are, not the reverse. And I do think we need broad campaign finance reform. I think there's lots and lots of different options from public financing to spending limits, obviously overturning Citizens United. I think aggressive transparency can definitely come into play here. I think ending outside groups' ability to engage. I think there's lots of things to discuss around timing of elections. I think thinking about hard versus soft money. Smarter people than me have proposed lots of different solutions, but we absolutely need campaign finance reform because the fact that a billionaire can buy our election is a problem regardless of who that billionaire is.
To what extent do you think the responsibility for Democratic shortcomings so far lies with the Democrats holding leadership positions, many of whom are old, versus voters? I ask that because Nick Perro writes, the Democratic image will follow our voting habits. If we want a better party, we have to force it to be better.
I agree with that. You want a better Democratic Party? Change who's in charge. Vote for different leaders. Engage in primaries. Run different candidates. Run yourself. The Democratic Party is defined by the people in it. And it is defined by how the Republican Party decides to shape it. But the raw materials we give them change what is possible. So I want to be really we have agency here. We have a ton of agency. And to pretend that we do not is to absolve ourselves of the responsibility to do something. And I will say, I see people in the comments talking about how, like, I'm naive on money and politics. I promise you, I've been working in campaigns for 15 years. I've been working with candidates raising money. I've been raising money myself. It is not as clean as they do the thing because they get the money. Sometimes they get the money because they will do the thing. And I think that is it's why candidate recruitment is so important. It's why who the candidate is and what they believe is the fundamental raw ingredient of everything else. And I want to be really explicit here. People talk about the money, the consultants, the ads, the messaging, because they think candidate is a fixed variable, that you cannot change it. What I am telling you and what Run for Something has done over the last almost 10 years or 9 years in is prove that that is not true. We have built a candidate pipeline of nearly 250,000 young people who raise their hands to run, all of whom, 98% of whom, have never been engaged in politics before, never thought about running for office before until we ask them. And then we help them get on the ballot and do it. If you treat that part of the funnel, running for local offices, the initial step, if you engage deeply in local candidate recruitment, you can change who runs for higher office. You can change who runs for local office. You can change how effective the ads are, how effective the messaging is, how they think about fundraising. Who the candidate is the core ingredient.
What you're saying is this a big part of the issue is a supply side problem.
Yes, 100%. That's a very good way of putting it.
Let me ask you about a message debate that was active during the 2024 campaign and is still active to some degree, because Jeff writes, they should have made the shutdown about democracy. That's an existential issue, as opposed to, say, healthcare. What do you think about how much Democrats should talk about that existential issue versus not so appealing to most people? They care about the price of eggs and gasoline.
I think it is true that democracy is an existential issue, and it is also true that most people care about their cost of living. That's not to say you shouldn't talk about democracy, but you've got to answer the question at the end of the day of why should voters want you to win, which is different than why you want to win. You want to win because winning is great and losing sucks. You want to win because you want to protect democracy. Voters want you to win because you're going to make their lives cheaper, their housing more affordable, their groceries less expensive, their childcare more accessible. If voters cannot clearly picture how their lives will be different or better when you win, they don't care. You got to engage in their self-interest. It's like I teach my toddler, if you want the baby to give you her toy, tell her why it's in her best interest to do so. Tell her what trade you're going to make. We don't have to like that for that to be true.
Let me ask you a question that goes to how much of the image of a party, the brand of a party, is baked over a very long period of time versus something more recent. Because Sam writes, how much do you think our party brand in lower engagement areas or regions without a strong party presence is simply defined by the last presidential candidate we ran?
I do think it is. And I think that's why we have to build up strong local and regional presences. Like if you're Democratic, and I think part of the challenge for, let's go back to New York for an example. If your Democratic Party, though, the most local Democrat you had was Eric Adams, yeah, no wonder you didn't like the Democratic Party. That man was nuts and corrupt. It didn't feel good to be governed by him. I think that is part of the challenge. And we need to make sure that our presidential nominee in the primary in 2027, 2028 is going to be really messy and personal and hard and nasty in many ways. And at the end of it, hopefully we'll be able to unite around the nominee. That will help give the party some shape. And we need to make sure that on the bottom, on the grassroots level, people have really strong Democrats they can personally have relationships with to give the party a different face.
In a more short term, how important is the congressional leadership? Because James Woodruff writes, Schumer and Jeffries must resign. Do you think that's true? I mean, Jeffries would seem to stand for the proposition that an older leader, Nancy Pelosi, who was very, very effective, stepped aside. Hakeem Jeffries is a younger man. Do you think, nevertheless, that he ought to get out?
I think both Jeffries and Schumer were cultivated to be in leadership in a moment where they thought we'd have majorities. They are peacetime leaders. Neither are effective, wartime consiglieres. They are not well suited to be leaders of the opposition party. They are well suited to be leaders of a governing coalition. And that is not what we need in this moment. Whether they should resign or not, Democratic caucuses to choose their leadership. That's up for Democratic members of the Congress and Senate to decide. But I think that it is clear they are not well suited for what we need in this particular era.
If Hakeem Jeffries were well suited, in your view, to what we need right now, what would he be doing differently?
I think there's a lot more around communication that every member of the House could be doing. I think there's more that he could be doing. I think it is clear that he does not really understand how to communicate in the way that we need in this moment. He tends to make it very personal. Like he does a lot of like, Trump, fight me. And it's like, my dude, we don't care about you. We care about the people. He tends to make it very, I think, egocentric. I think like his refusal to stand behind the Democratic nominee for New York really undercut the idea of vote blue no matter who, if we're standing behind our party and if we're trusting and respecting voters' positions. I think he often lets his ego get in the way of what he's supposed to be doing here.
Why do you think he did that with respect to Mamdani?
I think he doesn't like DSA. I think is the real answer. And I think he let his own personal.
You think that was his choice, or was it him trying to somehow protect his frontline members?
I think it is so deeply his choice. Because frontline members, like, in what world are their decisions going to be based on whether or not they supported the Democratic nominee for mayor a year and a half ago? I do think it does him real disservice in his community, in his district. And I think it really undercuts the argument that, when we go through a primary, the people who Democratic primary voters decide, that's our nominee and we stand behind them. And if you want people, especially when we're going to have some of these congressional races where the nominee might not be someone that everyone is super excited about nationally, we stand behind the Democratic nominee. And he could have said something as simple as that the day after the primary of, I am thrilled to see the Democratic voters of New York have chosen their nominee and I will stand behind them. And it would have been a one-day story, end of day. Instead, he dragged it out for months, and that actually undercuts people's faith in these institutions, which we desperately need.
Let me close with this question because I know we're at time. All year, there's been a lot of doomer thinking with regard to Trump. He seemed omnipotent in the beginning. He was wrecking a lot of government. He was exercising authority that he didn't have under the Constitution, blowing boats out of the water in the high seas, sending masked agents to seize people off the street, corrupting the Justice Department, all of that. As we sit today, his approval rating has been driven down to 40% or below in some places. You had a successful Democratic election. The gerrymandering blitz that Republicans have engaged in to try to protect the House does not seem to be producing the results that they wanted. Is the worm turning, and are you feeling more optimistic about the party, both with respect to 2026 and beyond?
I am. As I said, we've had nearly 250,000 young people raise their hands to run for office, including more than 75,000 just in the last year. We've had more people raise their hands to run for office in the last 12 months than we did in the entirety of Trump's first term. There is an incredible new generation of leaders ready to fight, ready to govern, ready to lead. And if we create the space for them and help them win big in 2026 and beyond, we are going to be able to do some incredible things past 2028. I also think we're seeing this in real time in the sort of Trump's MAGA civil war, his coalition does not exist without him. And whether actuarially or constitutionally, one way or another, that man is gone. He is never going to be on the ballot again.
And you don't think J.D. Vance has the magic?
I don't think J.D. Vance has the juice, and I don't think he's going to be able to hold on to it without a fight, and a fight that will get very bloody. Not literally, but metaphorically.
Right. Gotta be careful in these moments.
I know. And I think that the task for the Democratic Party right now is to prepare to rebuild that coalition and to pick up the pieces where we can. We don't need every Republican. We definitely don't need the neo-Nazis. We definitely don't need the deep, the 30% or so that is MAGA till they die. But we need some of them. And some of them are sick of the shit. Some of them would like to get, if not back to normal, to a new version of the United States in which it actually functions for more people.
You think there is some increment of MAGA? MAGA.
Not MAGA.
That RFS can appeal to.
No, I don't think there's a MAGA group that people can appeal to. I think there's like a 30% or so of the Republican base that we're never going to get, and we don't need to try.
You're talking about MAGA-adjacent Republicans.
I think the Republicans who vote for the tribe and were like, sort of didn't know where else to go, didn't feel at home in a Democratic Party when it was Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden, but now might. I think our opportunity here is not even to talk about ideology necessarily, but their frustration is with the system. Their frustration is that, especially for younger voters, who I think are real opportunities here, I think some of the older folks, like, we're never going to take them. But for younger voters, where their frustration is that the average age of a homeowner has been going up year over year. We just saw this data this week. The first-time homebuyers' median age is 40 years old. For young people who feel deeply locked out of the American dream and who feel like democracy hasn't worked for them, capitalism hasn't worked for them, AI is about to ruin their job prospects.
I take it you don't think the 50-year mortgage is going to solve their problem?
No, I do not think it is. We have to show them, not that we want to go back to normal, but we want to create a new version of a country that works for them. And we speak to their disillusionment with the American dream as it currently exists. It's not make America great again. It's make a new America better. It's make it work for young people in particular and give them not just the ability to afford to live here, but the ability to dream about what life could be and reopen their imagination. That is our opportunity. And I think that's what Mamdani did so well. And I think that's what other Democratic candidates can do too. They can say to, in particular, young voters who are not Democrats, but also not Republicans. They were voting for Trump because they didn't like what Democrats were offering. We can offer them something better. That is what we have to do.
Amanda Litman, that's a great note to close on. Congratulations on your success and best of luck going forward.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
You bet.
Did you like this video? Don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel and turn on notifications. For exclusive content and to support our independent, unfiltered journalism, head over to zeteo.com. Your support matters.